Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of About Abortion. The issues we're talking about in today's episode have actually accelerated somewhat since time of recording. This is due to be debated next week, Tuesday and Wednesday, the 17th and 18th of June. Please act urgently, get in touch with your MP, handwrite a letter if you can, even if you can see them in person, all the better. Please take action, please pray. They're debating full-term abortion on a bill that's got nothing to do with abortion next week. Full decriminalization. Please take action. Please pray. Things are happening very, very rapidly. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of About Abortion. I'm thrilled today to be joined, not in person, but virtually at a distance from, I believe, Glasgow. Is that right, John?
I'm in the Glasgow studio today. Yes, Dave, thanks so much for having me. A real pleasure.
Excellent. So yeah, great to have you, John. So John is the director of SPUC, the Society for the Protection of the Unborn Child, and calling in from Glasgow today. But I believe you've got, offices around the country, but also local chapters in even more locations, isn't there? So would you mind, John, just giving us a brief introduction to SPUC first? Then I'd love to hear a bit more about you personally.
Yes, sure. So yeah, SPUC, we were founded at the start of 1967 in response to the introduction or the proposal for what was the Abortion Act. And so we've been going since then. Presently, our headquarters is in London. So I travel between London and Glasgow, but yeah, we presently have an office in Preston, but we're actually, because of home working and stuff like that now, we don't so much need that. We've also got a base in Belfast, so we're around the country. Presently, we have about 50 staff work for SPUC. We do a variety of work. We do education, politics, communications, education. We do some creative work, so we've been looking at how we use sort of pro-life messaging in sort of creative formats, film, poetry, writing, all sorts of areas like that. We have about 60 branches around the country, so that's the backbone really of the activists that we mobilise, so we can get a lot of grassroots action. So if something comes up at Parliament, typically we would be reaching out to those branch members to get them to mobilise the local communities. So yeah, that's a very sort of thumbnail sketch of the sort of stuff we're doing, Dave.
Excellent, thank you. I'd love to return to some of that. We'd be blessed to hear more of your thinking on strategy and that kind of grassroots movement, how that interfaces with Parliament and so on. But we'll come back to that. But let's hear a bit more about you, John. Are you a family man? What's your situation there in Glasgow? And also my friend, our mutual friend, Christian Hacking, tells me I should ask you something about nuclear submarines. So I hope that isn't completely random. If it is, he stitched me up yet again. But I believe you might have some background in nuclear submarines I'd love to hear about.
Yes, yeah. Well, I can tell you that first. I was an engineer and I worked on the reactors for nuclear submarines. So that was a job I did. That was my first job. I studied physics. So I worked as an engineer for a few years. That was part of it. I then moved from nuclear reactors to aero engines. So I did do some work for Rolls-Royce, looking at aircraft engines spent some time in engine development. So yeah, that was a long time ago. Life has changed since then quite a lot. I am a family man. I'm married to Angela and we have 7 children. They're all grown up now, but I've still got 4 at home. So yeah, life is pretty busy. But I've now moved into grandparent stage, Dave. So okay. I've got 4 grandchildren just now, and I'm going to have another 2 by the end of the year. So well, I've already got them, but they will be born by the end of the year. So 6 grandchildren and 7 children. So that's the family situation. I moved from engineering into education. I was a lecturer in computing and systems analysis, and databases was another area, database design in particular. I worked in further education for a time, and then from there I was always sort of as an adult really involved in the pro-life movement. In the early 90s, I was the chairman of the East Kilbride branch of SPUC, but I got involved in the general election of 1997, and I stood as a pro-life candidate that particular election. the famous Labour landslide for Tony Blair, of course. But a couple of years after that, I started to work for the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Scotland. I became their parliamentary officer. So I then ended up spending 16 years doing parliamentary liaison. So that would typically cover all the moral issues. So Catholic social teaching, effectively a bit of a specialism of mine. So it was to promote the Catholic Church's social teaching, liaise with politicians and with the government. So that would cover a whole breadth of areas. And in fact, I was at one point put on the Scottish Government set up a working group on nuclear weapons. So I was on that particular working group, for example. But a range of issues like poverty, inclusion, criminal justice, those. But the one that actually dominated just by the way society was going was the whole issue around same-sex relationships and about how the advance in terms of changing family law. So I was quite involved in all of that, as you know, as you'll be aware of the Clause 28, all of the sort of debate around that. And really, as you had this sort of counter perspective on human sexuality, you know, rolling out across society and changing all of our institutions, you know, the church was very involved in that. So I was quite involved in that for a very long time. And at the same time, we had the typical ethical issues around assisted suicide. Assisted suicide was a repeated challenge. You know, there was a few bills that I was quite involved in trying to fight them off, mostly in Scotland, but also a UK level as well. Assisted suicide is we're now looking down the barrel of a gun on that, but really in 2000 it looked as if we might have some form of assisted suicide or at least passive euthanasia at that time. So that's been a 25-year struggle. And then in 2015, I took on the role as Chief Executive Officer of SPUC Scotland. And after a few years, I became the Deputy Chief Executive for the SPUC UK. And then almost 4 years ago, I succeeded John Smeaton as the CEO of the whole of the SPUC family across the UK.
Okay, thank you. And I remember meeting you just shortly after that, I think, at the March for Life, and enjoyed our brief
David,
conversation.
You always do an amazing job at the March for Life. I've always been impressed by how you so eloquently defend the cause in face of hostility.
Well, it's easy pickings, isn't it? March for Life. They all come out. You don't have to find them. They come and find you. So, but no, that's interesting. Just as an aside, I'm interested to hear just a tiny bit about. Obviously, you're Roman Catholic and know the Roman Catholic scene much better than I do within the nation. Obviously, we have Church of England bishops in the House of Lords. What sort of standing does the Roman Catholic Church have, either officially or unofficially, in whether the Scottish Parliament or English Parliament? Obviously, you were a kind of liaison for the Roman Catholic Church. It sounds like you were sort of representing, as it were, the bishops to the Scottish Parliament, if I understand correctly. But yeah, can you tell us just a little bit more about what the sort of Roman Catholic seat at the table looks like in politics? And also, if you know, roughly how big is the, shall we say, practicing Roman Catholic population in the UK?
Oh, Dave, you put me on the spot with those numbers. But, yeah, I mean, basically, officially, there's no seat at the table. You know, there's the Catholic Church really, I suppose, isn't in favour of a theocratic sort of political arrangement anyway. You know, so we you know, the secular state should be secular. We don't have a particular role in politics that we're given because we're churchmen or because we're a particular faith. But in saying that, you know, the governments typically do recognise that the Catholic Church is a major player in civic society. So I think by virtue of that, we do get a level of representation. So typically, at UK level and Scotland level, there would be yearly meetings with the First Minister or with government ministers at a UK level. When I worked for the the Bishops' Conference of Scotland. A few times I would go down to Westminster with the Cardinal O'Brien, it was at the time. The Cardinal O'Brien would meet with the Prime Minister and other government ministers. So they do, the politicians do know they have to, be aware of the audience. There's a lot there. At that time, I suppose 25 years ago, religion was much more influential in our society. So we had a much bigger influence then. You had really prominent churchmen. Cardinal Winning in Scotland was very, very prominent, a huge figure. And Cardinal O'Brien also became a huge figure politically. If he spoke out on an issue, it would always get news coverage. So he could pretty much get a meeting with the politicians or government when he wanted to.
Right.
I think that has changed massively in the last decade. In particular, I think we've seen a sort of collapse. I think of that. There are things that go on. The Catholic Church in Scotland still has a parliamentary officer. There are public affairs type officers involved with the Catholic Church in England and Wales, and they are doing a level of lobbying or liaison. But I don't think we're really taking that seriously by politicians as an entity. We need to now look ourselves about what role are we playing as people of faith in convincing our fellow citizens to stand up for the ethical values that Christianity promotes.
Yes. Yeah, great. We'll come back to that, because I remember that my first conversation with you actually about engaging the culture and how there's access we can't take for granted anymore. We've got to be making those arguments, making the case from the ground up. So we'll come back to that. Now, from nuclear submarines to another lethal issue, we're right in the thick of this, aren't we? Just at the moment, there is an attempt which is packed full of lethal force. If this does pass, this is catastrophic actually for human life in our nation. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in Parliament right now with members of Parliament proposing essentially to decriminalise abortion? Now, perhaps you can help us with some of the phrases, some of the euphemisms that might be being used to cover up what's really going on here. But in essence, we're talking about abortion potentially being allowed up till birth for any reason, even potentially infanticide. Is that right? Can you just tell us what's going on in Parliament right now, so that people can be aware of this ambitious attempt by the abortion lobby?
Yeah, so just now there's a crime and policing bill going through Parliament just now, and two MPs in particular have proposed amendments to the bill, and one of them is Stella Creasy. She's got a track record of trying this. She's tried it last year in the criminal justice bill. She tried the same thing, and a few others have tried it over the years. And then there's another one that looks more likely to go through this time. It's Tonya Antonazzi, and she's got a proposal that would take abortion totally out of the criminal law. And in both cases, what they aim to do is they aim to modify the Infant Life Preservation Act, which was in 1929, and the Offences Against the Person Act. And there's two particular clauses in that criminalise people killing a child in the womb. I suppose the big euphemism is that this is all about protecting women from the might of the state or the intrusion of the police into their lives. It's all put out as that these poor victims, and it's terrible that they might be investigated, and being investigated for an issue so traumatic that women have to be protected from that. So that's been ongoing for several years, but last year looked difficult, and we put a huge campaign into to try to raise an understanding of what it actually meant to decriminalise, because a lot of the politicians didn't seem to understand what that meant. And we tried to get the message through that decriminalising abortion means you're supporting abortion to birth.
Yeah.
I mean, the law really, as you say, is terrifying what it could do. I mean, you could effectively have someone who just enjoys seeing a baby at 38 weeks gestation writhing in agony and dying, and somebody could choose that as a hobby and think, well, I'd like to do that, and this law would allow, if it's decriminalised, they could do that. There have been cases in the past. One case, a woman was prosecuted. That's because her neighbours found. I'm quite sure. I need to check the exact details on this one, Dave. But at the time, it's a few years since I've read this one. The neighbours had found a baby in the bin and reported that to the police. Now, the proposal now is that a woman couldn't be investigated. So if you found a baby in your bin or the bin next door, if you reported to the police, they wouldn't be allowed to investigate according to this law. It's quite absurd and horrifying. But the reality is, I don't think many people actually think like that now when it comes to abortion. Abortion has become like a political football, or you're in a particular clan. You're in the pro-abortion clan, and if the idea comes from your side, then it's to be supported. So there is a real worry that if this amendment is selected for a vote when it goes to the next stage in the House of Parliament, that there's a real chance that it could go through. So it's worrying times, but I think the problem for us is ignorance and an unwillingness to reflect on the issue. And we saw a report in the Times last week about the police, for example. They recorded a senior police officer saying that the police were worried about having to deal with any investigation of women for what might be criminality around abortion. So we're seeing that there's just not a will to defend human life, even when the law does protect it, as it should now. So worrying times, but we could see that proposal voted on within the next couple of weeks.
Wow. Yeah, I think you're right about what's already out there, that the reluctance to apply the law, even as it is, right up to flagrant disregard of the law. The Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists has actually issued official guidance to medical practitioners. I don't know if you've seen this, John, saying they advise against reporting anything criminal to do with pregnancy, childbirth, etc. So that's to say, if a woman has clearly committed an illegal abortion, say at 30 weeks at home on her own with the pills or whatever, they're literally giving guidance to their doctors and nurses to say it is not, this is their wording, they say it's not in the public interest to report that to the police, which is astonishing. I mean, who do they think they are to just overwrite the law of the land and just decide, do you know what? That's a crime, but it's not in the public interest to even report it, let alone prosecute. I mean, it's astonishing.
It's staggering. No, it's one rule for them and one, one for us, because you put a foot wrong on the other side, and we're accused of intimidating people, harassing them just for having a pro-life position. You've obviously seen Isabel von Spruce and others, arrested simply for praying in silence. So it's a very misshapen area of law, and those in authority really have given up the will to uphold law. So we've moved beyond a proper understanding of law, where the police are there to enforce the law and public institutions are there to uphold the law. We now see this idea. I suppose it's an area that's been developed over the last couple of decades, and it's this idea of, I suppose in a way, it's this soft power idea. You just act as if something is the case, and by acting it, you sort of lead the law in the direction you want it to go. So that's what they're doing. They're convincing people that it's such a terrible thing that a woman might actually be asked why she has a dead baby that's of 30 weeks gestation in her possession, and that she might actually have to give account to what's happened there, or actually she might even have done something wrong. I mean, these things were being trained through the mass media and through the political parties and these campaign groups and the abortion industry itself. Now, they make money from killing babies. So if they can remove every obstacle in the way, then that's certainly going to help their industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very astute point that you made there about how they'll anticipate the law, won't they? They'll act as though the law's already there. they'll practice that, they'll put out the messaging, and then that, of course, makes it much easier for that law to pass. It's almost like, it's almost like sort of emotionally manipulating the nation into supporting the law, because they say, well, this is what we're already doing, essentially.
Yeah.
So and that, again, that is why this is worrying, why this really could pass, because some of that propaganda really does fly, doesn't it, in the public square. Just before we move on to that, I'd like to talk more about that side of things. Just correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that with these amendments being proposed, one of the many things that this would mean would be there's not really any meaningful recourse for women whose babies are aborted against their will, because it's the Offence Against the Person Act, isn't it, that's used to prosecute, for example, men who've slipped abortion pills into women's drinks. I believe that such women who've actually been victimized by others will not have that law backing them anymore. So there are all sorts of issues which decriminalisation would bring to the surface. Of course, the dangers of the unborn child is the primary, but there are many other consequences, aren't there, which would come to the fore if this is just kicked out of the criminal framework
Well,
altogether.
I think at this stage, Dave, it certainly identifies the woman, if it's in relation to her own pregnancy, couldn't be criminalised. So I think there still would be measures that could be taken
Right.
against other third parties, including doctors, including coercion. So that is possible. But I think what you will see is the understanding of the value of a human life. I mean, if a woman can kill her the child in her womb, I mean, obviously as Christians we know, even if the mother forgets the child in her womb, it was seen as if that's the last thing that could possibly happen. A mother forget the child of her womb, but this is what it would like. So if our society thinks, well, at 38 weeks, going up to birth, even a woman can just have that child killed. What does it say about the value of the? So it would just be, there's a dead baby. Well, it wasn't the mother that killed it, but it was this other guy killed it, and the level of how serious it is just is greatly devalued. It would be a massively detrimental effect for the value of life in general, because then it would be like somebody's just killed a newborn. Was disabled, or some reason the mother afterwards thought, I can't cope, and she just waited a couple of weeks later and then killed the child. You can see this is the way the culture of death moves. It just incrementally moves. Some campaigners have done that in the past. We've learned over the last 40, 50 years that campaigners use the salami approach. They call it that if you read some of the particular campaign proposals. Let's use a salami approach, and we can take people just a slice at a time, but just keep taking those slices, and eventually we'll get to here. So some of these people, do they all? Does Stella Creasy understand that? Tonya Antonazzi understand that? I really don't know the scope of how deeply they think about it, but there's certainly useful pawns by others who may understand that. But this is there's a real anti-human philosophy behind this, and we're seeing that right across society now, that there are so many proxies now that are just attacks on humanity. We're seeing it at every level, and that is like, there are too many children being born, or people are contaminating the earth. I mean, in Scotland now, we're just about to face a new bill which is introducing the crime of ecocide. So they're threatening to put people in jail for up to 20 years for doing serious detrimental damage to the environment. At the same time as they're proposing you're allowed to kill a child right up to birth, but the full force of the law will come down on your head if you chop down too many trees, or you breathe out too much carbon dioxide. I mean, it really is startling, but there are parallels to that as well. It brought to my mind just how much was happening in the they go mad when you talk about this, but if the parallels of the Nazi regime, and as the Nazis were practicing vivisection on Jews, they were introducing anti-vivisection laws on animals, so that there's some sort of perverse parallel that goes on, that as we devalue human life, we suddenly try to find other ways to prove that we really are virtuous people. So we put that either into the environment or into dogs or cats or dolphins. So it's as people of faith, we see a particular perspective why that might be the case, but it's a strange contradiction in the mind of modern humanity.
Yeah, it certainly is, isn't it? I guess it's a form of idolatry apart from anything else. When you stop honoring human beings made in the image of God, you start worshiping created things, and you elevate them above even humans. But it was interesting what you said about the salami approach, John, because certainly that's what's happened. I mean, as you say, how conscious different players are of that strategy is another question. But certainly what you can see in the Abortion Law Reform Association, which has been around for more than 100 years now, coming up for 100 years, I think. It's changed its name over time, but they were there in the 60s. And they were very much in favour of abortion up till birth, decades before the Abortion Act passed, and they were all about choice and feminism and individualism and so on. But when it came to the parliamentary debate, they were very happy to take that incremental step of, no, we've got all these regulations, it's only in, safe, legal and rare, wasn't the phrase used at the time, but that was the kind of idea. Very happy to use the backstreet abortions kind of rhetoric to get something open. And then, of course, it did open the floodgates. So we've definitely seen that happen again and again. And I think what you said about the way it devalues human life across the board, again, we see that in our culture, don't we? That whether it's with assisted suicide, attitudes towards those with disabilities, and I do think the issues we have in care homes, abuses that you read about, whether it's with newborn babies or other abuses in hospitals and care systems, it does seem to me all fruit, nasty, rotten fruit of this culture of death, which is creeping right across our nation.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we know as the principles of Christianity are removed from our society, you're removing the foundations that made civilization possible. So in this part of the world, really we saw that growth, improving how we treated other people, growing from a recognition that people were made in the image of God. So we saw that grow and prosper, and it allowed Christendom to effectively become Europe, and Europe has led the world in its understanding of human rights. We saw that human beings are always capable of evil, and this is what some of the detractors of religion don't realize. Human beings will always do evil things, but there are some things which can restrain that evil, and some values that allow us to put in a sort of scaffolding of culture that makes it easier to be good. And that's what we're always striving to do. And Christianity did that. And you don't have to be Christian ultimately, it's natural law. A human being is capable of reason and is capable of understanding human goods and those things that provide for human prospering. So those can be identified, but Christianity had it laid out for people, and it nurtured a whole continent of people on those values. But as you take away one piece of it, it starts to make, if these lives are expendable, or that way of living is acceptable, gradually, well, if that applies to me, then it applies to the next person and the next person. And really, if life is about being productive, well, there's these elderly people that are not that productive. Or if it's about quality of life, those guys don't look as if they're enjoying themselves that much from my eyes. Like, are they really as valuable as me? You can see how these ideas start to pollute the current of thought in a civilization, and to the point that actually threatens the genuine ability of us to proceed much more than the next 100 years. We're seeing that, the war on family, the war on children. I think we're now looking at the UK has something like a population half-life of something like 50 years. So the natural fertility rate just now is so low that in 50 years, the UK will have a population of about half what we have just now.
Wow.
And then another 50 years, you'll be a quarter of what it is just now. So people just, I mean, are politicians talking about that, thinking about that? And the other thing is, it just won't be a quarter of what we've got just now in 100 years. It will be a quarter of really, really, really old people with hardly any children. How do you run a society like that? Now, Japan are sort of way ahead of everyone else in that, so they're starting to struggle. And it's like, do we need to make robots to take care of us? Do we need to make robots that seem like humans so that we can pour out our nurturing instincts to have somebody to love? It's just this. So we are creating a hell on earth.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the people who are doing it think they actually call themselves progressive.
Yeah.
So it's quite absurd.
Astonishing, isn't it? Astonishing. Now, I'll come back to that in just a moment, but briefly before we move on, just from the decrim specifically, obviously there are these two different amendments going on, and I've seen some refer to division or competition within the pro-abortion lobby, these two different amendments. I mean, both of them can't pass. What do you think's going on there? Is there division in the ranks, or is this some kind of ploy? What are the tactics? Are they? Is Stella promoting this more extreme one to make the less extreme one look more palatable? It's an incremental step forward. What do you think's going on, and what should we be aware of there?
It's very, very interesting. I mean, in a way, it's good when you see this division in the side of who we think are the bad guys, if we're allowed to say that nowadays without being judgmental. But the spat looked like a one. I watched it in committee stage between Stella and Tonya. It looked a sincere one, and I can imagine Stella Creasy's nose could be out of joint a bit. In the past, she seems to have been quite close to Rupert Hutt and Diana Johnson. They seem to have been working in consort, but this time it looks as if it was a new name in the block, and she's taken the glory. So perhaps there is a sort of rivalry, but perhaps Stella Creasy will feel that, hey, I've been the poster girl for decriminalised abortion. I really don't know, but division in a way is human, and there are always egos, and people want to have the glory of what they think is some sort of achievement. So yeah, I'll be interested to see how that plays out. Tonya Antonazzi has said that. Interestingly, she used the term "the industry is behind her." It's interesting that the abortion industry, because it is an industry. So I don't know what she has done. I don't really know much of her background, to be quite honest. But the SPUC staff who work in public affairs pay a bit more attention to that. So I'm sure I will find out more in the coming weeks.
Now, final thing on that. Obviously, time could be very, very short on this. And so this is one of those situations in which, like it or not, we have to react in quite a kind of immediate way. And it's unlikely we're going to convince, for example, members of parliament who are pro-abortion or kind of unsure moderates or pro-choicers to become genuinely pro-life in the matter of 2 weeks. So what do you think people can do? As I say, because it's happening so quickly, it is really about making a beeline for your member of parliament, isn't it, at this stage? What do you think people can do? What arguments do you think can be made? Or is there a particular warning you think people can issue to their member of parliament? Say, look, even if you're not with me on the issue itself, morally, on principle, here's why even you should think this is a bad idea, this is reckless. What's the best tactic, do you think, at this late stage in the game to try and at least...
Yeah, it's very late. I think it's the key message, I suppose, is that decriminalisation, to framing it like that, distorts the reality. And the reality is this is abortion to birth. We've got some polling that will come out. We just did it last week. And it will come out, and it shows, I think the figures are around 5% of the population would support abortion to birth. So even to awaken your politicians to that, the public is not for this. In fact, our polling will also show there's a much higher percentage of people would actually support no abortion whatsoever. A considerable number, which is quite heartening, because you would believe that everyone supports abortion as it is
Mm-hmm.
just now. The majority, well, a sizable number, the biggest group would support a reduction in time limits.
Yep.
A considerable number of people would support a regime where there is no abortion, and 5%. I mean, I'm horrified even that 5% think killing a baby right up to 40 weeks gestation is acceptable. But nonetheless, that's the numbers, and I don't think that is a mandate for politicians to be supporting this extreme law.
Yeah, and just as an anecdotal reflection on that, we've noticed in our public education work, in our street work, we've been doing a bit of just testing the water, really on the concept of a heartbeat bill. Essentially, would you support effectively a ban on abortion from the moment a heartbeat is detected? Aside from extreme cases, just kind of testing the water there. And we're finding that consistently more people are showing support for that than disagreeing with it. So that would support what you're saying there. Most people would like to see a reduction. And I think I would say increasingly the population is out of step with these extreme members of parliament, with so much of the media, the mainstream media, and of course the completely ideologically brainwashed and overtaken institutions like the Royal College of Obs and Gynae. That there's a big disparity there, and I'd say an increasing one. People on the ground are becoming, I think, more uncomfortable actually with abortion as they're looking at it afresh, as they're looking at the evidence and thinking it through. Certainly, younger people in particular.
Yeah. Abortion has required ignorance
Yeah.
to flourish. Yeah, a lot of propaganda. But interesting, you'll be interested when the polling is published, Dave, because we do ask we ask people in terms of what they think in terms of weeks. But for many people, they don't really even know what that means. What
No.
is a baby at
Yeah.
12 weeks or 18 weeks? They don't really think about that. But we also ask them about things like that in terms of the heartbeat, about when
Okay.
a baby would feel pain. And, and we've got weeks for that. So when you ask them that way around, yeah, they're much more pro-life.
Yeah.
So I think we can get that message home. We are now
Yeah.
building up, across the world. You're seeing voices who are able to compete with the mainstream, and the mainstream has been captured by these so-called progressive
Yeah.
voices who just are for just about everything anti-human. Killing babies, killing the elderly, living any which way you want. Neglecting children, lives lived for the parents' advantage rather than their children's advantage. So we've had those voices capturing Hollywood, every political party, the BBC, mainstream channels, newspapers, but the fight back is on. And as the fight back continues and the truth gets out there, I think we will win that.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. Well, let's go on to that, John, if you're happy. Let's talk about strategy for engaging the culture. Where do you see things going, or where do we need to see things going over the next, say, 5 to 10 years in terms of engaging the culture and seeing a change in heart and mind? I'd love to hear your thoughts on, if we use this term secular culture, obviously things are shifting even in that, aren't they? I don't know if you've seen these reports, but certainly more young people coming into the church, more people reading Bibles, more people exploring spirituality. I think something is changing. The wind is changing somewhat in the nation. So that's an interesting dynamic as well. But tell me, what are your thoughts in terms of the big picture strategy? Where do we need to go? And within that, I mean, you mentioned this already. You don't have to be a Christian to be pro-life, and I agree with you on that. Whether we talk about natural law or just the fact that people have a conscience, a maternal instinct, a paternal instinct, as you say, can the mother forget the child at her breast? Jesus himself said, "Though you're evil, you know how to give good gifts to your children." So there is just something about being a human, which does, I believe, very much leave open the possibility of basic care for your children, regardless of faith, sin notwithstanding. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts in particular about how faith interfaces with the secular culture, or whatever we call it, and is it necessary to, and do you believe, is it helpful to bring the theological foundations, the faith foundations of a pro-life worldview into the public arena, or do you favour an approach that kind of sidesteps that and comes from a different angle?
I suppose what I would say is you need to identify what are the culture shaping areas of society, and you need an adequate number of people working in those areas to bring about change. Now, the change doesn't need a lot of people, so you do not need a lot of people to swing the mood around, to change the temperature in a particular area. But you still need a core of people who are really dedicated and really have got the message, and they know how to spread that, and they're willing to spread it. So I would say that that's one thing. In terms of where do you get those people, I think the obvious place is that people of faith, that they've already sort of read the instruction manual about what human life is like, in a way, so they're much more open. So I suppose maybe within SPUC we would look at that, where is the low-hanging fruit in a way, and it is typically within the Christian denominations, in particular SPUC, just the way we've developed. The majority of people who support us are Catholic. I mean, I've heard you speak on some of the issues about why that might be the case as well. But I think the Catholic Church, certainly over the last decades, has been better at that being clear on the line, that the clarity of teaching from successive popes on the most important fundamental values that support a culture of life has been clearer. So you've got lots of Catholics out there who know that killing innocent human beings is an abomination and you shouldn't do it. And I think within all the Christian denominations, you will have a significant number of people who believe that as well. So I think you can find a lot of people in the Christian denominations who can, in effect, be the leaven throughout the rest of society. Because I think you then need to think, well, how are our citizens being formed? And they're being formed in their professions. Of course, they've been performed in schools. And I suppose the crucial one where really the progressives or the liberals really hammer at home is at university. So the universities have been captured for decades, really by this counter Western culture set of values. And the other huge area, and we've tried to dabble in this one, and that is the creative industries. So the film industry, music industry, fashion industry. All of those areas. These are forming the values of our citizens. So we really need to get people involved in those areas who are pro-life, and as well as getting them involved, we also need to teach them how do you message, if we call it, if we use the term we use within SPUC, chatting about our messaging, or anyone who does marketing would talk about their messaging. How do you present your message when you're in that culture shaping area of society? How do you convince others? Because sadly, one of the problems you and I have probably both been aware of for the last decade and more, much more, is that people don't reason very well, and a lot of their opinions are informed by emotion. So if they've been convinced through their emotions, then they're not going to be convinced very easily the other way just through the use of their reason. And we have whole swathes of people now who are coming through university who have very highly emotive views, or views that have been created through emotion. So you'll see this, if you've confronted them at March for Life, but many pro-lifers will encounter this if they go to a university campus. We've certainly had it. You turn up at university and you'll have a baying mob outside, trying to break the door down. They're not great at reasoning, but they have this very emotional position, formed by they are the people that stand up for women's rights, and you wicked pro-lifers are there trying to take away women's rights and trying to suppress women. So, one of the things we have been doing is we have been teaching people what's the way to communicate with people using these emotive tools, and yeah, that's a part of that. So, it's a very broad overview of what we're doing. But you need to find the people who can be the leaven in the culture shaping areas of society, and they need to know what is the message to convince people that they encounter. Ultimately, the strategy has to be that we find people in society who are willing to be the leaven, especially in the culture shaping areas of society. So it needs to be in your schools, in your universities, in your trade unions, in your political parties, in newspapers and television channels, in the entertainment industries. So you need people working there, but as well as working there, they need to know effectively how to communicate. So there are key ways in which you communicate with people. Now, we are very much in a post-rational society, so reason doesn't work as much. So you need to, but there are tools that you can provide people with about how to communicate effectively against people who don't reason. So these are some of the things that we've got a training day coming up soon in Manchester. We've been doing them around the country, but it's to train people exactly in what are those tools and techniques that you can use so that you know that you're communicating effectively.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. We talk about that as well, living in this sort of post-rational age. And I don't know if you saw Charlie Kirk from the US came over and tried to debate Oxford and
So
Cambridge
yes,
students, and even there couldn't find much to reason with. And I think it is quite shocking. And yeah, I had an interesting chat with a guy who's studying at Oxford recently about how he believes the aesthetic argument, that the arguing for the beauty of human life and God as a creator of beauty, is an angle which has some resonance in a culture which may have lost reason but still admires beauty, although perhaps a distorted version of it. So I think certainly in our organization, as perhaps we do use images quite a lot, because that can bypass a lot of the reasoning or the lack of reasoning with something that's very impactful and communicates very quickly, very powerfully, the beauty of life in the womb, and the horror of the violence being done. So that's one way in which we're trying to work with this sort of almost post-rational culture. But yeah, it's an interesting challenge we have set before us as culture changes very, very rapidly.
yeah, indeed. Well, yeah, well, Dostoevsky famously had one of his characters in the Prince say that beauty will save the world. So yeah, you're onto something there. And yeah, so yeah, human beings. Alison McIntyre just died a fortnight. I think it was a fortnight ago or a week ago. Famous Scottish philosopher. Uh, but he said that I'm paraphrasing him, of course, but he said that people recognize virtue. So when they see it, when you see a person, when you see courage, you recognize it as a virtue. You recognize a virtuous person who's courageous, as opposed to a person who's cowardly. So when you see virtue, you have an opportunity. Pope Leo just this week has been talking about married life, and he's been saying that the example of a well lived out marriage is a lesson to people who think cohabitating is enough. So I think the world needs witnesses just now, and they can see what virtues are, and the human heart knows it. You mentioned it earlier. Every human being has a conscience, but they also have a sense of what is true, beautiful, and good. And so we always have that. That is the advantage we always have, and that's why every evil that arises in history always falls apart.
Yeah,
Because they've got to keep up the lie forever.
yeah.
Whereas what we're arguing for is eternally true, and it can never ever be effaced completely.
Yeah.
It can only be obscured for a time.
Yeah, I take great encouragement from that, John. I think that whether we think in terms of, I don't know if these terms are terms that you also use, but whether we think in terms of common grace, or as I say, natural law, the conscience, or just the fact that Satan can distort, twist, steal, etc., but he can't create, and he can't actually produce a viable alternative. And in that sense, everything he does obviously is ultimately limited to the point of it's all going to be destroyed. But also, I think we do see that played out in every great historic injustice, as you say. It always depends on being hidden to thrive.
Yeah.
It has to dissemble. It has to use euphemisms. It has to keep people in the dark. And so, in that sense, whilst of course sin is always going to be in the human heart on earth, when it comes to big sort of systemic injustices, each and every one, in a sense, has its days numbered, because it's just unsustainable. As you say, truth, beauty, goodness are self-evident, and there's only so long a movement that's opposed to that stuff will even just stand internally. So that is an interesting, and I think an encouraging point to look at. Absolutely. Now, I'm mindful of your time here, John, and our listeners. I tried to wrap things up around this mark. So let me just ask one or two more questions, if I may, and we'll wrap it up. So there's so much we could pick up on what you shared there, and perhaps another time we can. But talk to us just briefly, if you will, about we've talked about engaging the culture, but the pro-life movement itself. We perhaps haven't got time to go into it now. I think, I don't know if you would agree with me. I don't know how much you want to talk about it, how helpful it is to talk about it in a setting like this. But the pro-life movement, it seems to me, compared to the other side, we've been somewhat lacking in coordination. I think we've been on the back foot so often. What would you like to see change in the pro-life movement? How do you think we need to become more effective working together, perhaps? So that we can really defeat this great evil.
Yeah, I suppose I would say just an understanding that the pro-life movement has many facets, and sometimes their intentions. So one of the tensions we have within SPUC, which we manage very well, but that is that we provide counselling to women who've had abortions. So we work closely with women who've been there, done the worst thing possible. That I suppose they actually tell us that. But at the same time, we're trying to tell people how horrendous this is. So there is a tension in that. Well, if you're saying this is absolutely wicked, and then we've done that, you're saying that we're wicked. So you could conflate those things. So that there's a tension there. So I suppose what I would say is in the pro-life movement, to have to sort of have the back of those who are on your side, who might be doing it slightly different from you. Mm-hmm. I would say that we're all on the same side. We're all trying to save human life, and people might not be doing it exactly the way you want. The technique, for example, I know CBR UK use some graphic images, and other people say, "Oh, that's terrible," and how judgmental it is, and that's wicked, or whatever. As opposed to say, "Well, guys, we've got your back. And good luck if that works for you. We're not coming to attack you. You'll get attacked by the pro-abortion. Let it be the pro-abortion guys who are attacking pro-lifers, not other pro-lifers, because they're divided on strategy. We should, take St. Paul's words, I suppose, and in matters of preference, let's have charity, but on matters of principle, let's have unity. So we all believe that every human life is sacred, that a civilized society protects the innocent, and that those that are most vulnerable need the most protection. So those are the things that we should unite around. And if there are differences in strategy, let's chat about them. I believe that discussion is the answer to finding the best ideas, and just be willing to think. So if someone comes to me and explains, well, I think this strategy would work, or this tactic, let's say, I think our strategy is that we need to convince the rest of our fellow citizens that human life is precious. But the tactics within that, there might be certain things that you try that I think, well, that's a good idea, but we've already built up an expertise in this area, and we're going to put our resources into that. So that would be one thing. The second thing I would say is, in the pro-life movement, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So you've got limited resources. So I would say, whether you think it's just innate or whether you think God's giving you it, you have your particular talents and your particular calling. And I would say, if you have that, then use your resources in the way you feel called to. I would say that. The other thing I would say is, I often get a lot of feedback that SPUC doesn't work well with other organisations, or why are you not playing with our... All I can say is that over the last 10 years, I'm aware of the level of support that SPUC give to other pro-life organisations. We give out hundreds of thousands of pounds in support to other pro-life organisations. So I'll not name them all now, but I recently had a meeting with a bishop, and he said something to that effect about, well, we hear that you don't work very well with other pro-life organisations. And I was able to tell him 10 organisations that we'd funded in the 2 years previous to that. So I don't know if other pro-life organisations do that. We do have a big support, SPUC. We're well established since 1967. So we do have resources, and we are very grateful that we have them. But we do want to contribute wherever we can to help other pro-life organisations. So for some pro-life organisations, that has been to give them seed money to get going and to get their initiative off the ground. And for others, it's to help them when they've needed money for advertising, for example. So we've done that for lots of organisations. We just recently got 2 different pro-life organisations from around the world got in touch with us who were desperate for funding, and we gave them that funding. So those are the sorts of things that we are doing at SPUC. And I just think if you're doing it differently for us, or if you don't think we're doing it in a way that's helpful, I'm happy to hear that and discuss it. So yeah, I think we've all got talents, and we're all doing the right thing in facing these terrible threats to human life. And good luck to all the pro-life organisations in whatever way you choose to do that.
Yeah, thank you, John. That's helpful. Using what we've got, in a sense, staying in our lane, isn't it? Doing what you're good at, and if other people are going at a different angle, bless them. But then even using what we've got to bless others as well directly and help each other out. That's a great word on that. And certainly, I think I would add to that. I mean, I'm obviously relatively new to the game, as it were. I think some memories go back a long way, and I don't even know what's myth and what's fact. But whatever divisions there may have been in the past, whatever issues there may have been between organisations in the past, there is an opportunity to start afresh. But I think the enemy wants to divide. The enemy wants to sow accusation and distrust and so on. And sometimes it's built on nothing, or it's built on ancient history. And time is too short. Lives are too precious. There's too much at stake. We've got to leave that behind and work together as best we can. So yeah, we're certainly grateful for your partnership in this work. John, there's so much more I want to talk about, but I think maybe we should, if you're willing, we can pick it up another.
Dave, thanks for your time, taking all your energies and skills to chat to me. Really appreciated it.
No, not at all. But perhaps if you're up for it another time, we could pick up some other things. Love to talk more about the dynamic of Roman Catholics and Protestants working together, and the strengths and challenges of that. A bit about the history of the Roman Catholic Church and the Protestant Church on this issue. It'd be great to explore those things, but I think we'll have to leave those for another day. But just final word, if I may, John, would you just tell us briefly, in a nutshell, what you think that the new Pope means for this issue in our nation and around the world? I don't know if there's much that's come to light on this issue in particular, but any brief reflections of that before we close?
Yeah, I think if you look into his background, his formation is superb. I mean, his expertise, he's really steeped in St. Augustine. So, I love City of God and Confessions. And if you read that, St. Augustine was writing at a time when the order of society was falling apart, and he diagnosed that very well. And I think we're living at a similar time. So I think he's the right Pope at the right time when we're facing so many, which are existential threats to sort of civilization. I think we are facing that time, and I think he has the formation to help us see a way through it.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you, John. That's a helpful nutshell response. Thank you. Well, John, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for the work you're doing. All the very best to you and your team, and we look forward to continuing to work together in any way possible. And certainly let's be hard at work in the next couple of weeks as these amendments go out. So all those listening, please obviously share this as ever with your networks, both on both sides, SPUC and our listeners here. And in particular, let's make a big push over the next couple of weeks to to try and persuade our members of parliament any which way to oppose these awful amendments. And then we need to get ahead of ourselves onto the front foot and see the culture change into a culture for life. Thank you, John. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next week.